When he drove back into the neighborhood after all those years, he felt a strange mix of comfort and tension settle in his chest. The road looked the same, lined with old trees that bent just slightly toward the lake as if trying to catch a glimpse of the water. The houses looked a little newer, a little shinier, but the quiet closeness of the place hadn't changed. He wasn't here for nostalgia, though he had come back because his mother needed help, and there was no question he would do whatever he could for her. The moment he parked in the driveway, he noticed how still everything felt. No kids riding bikes, no people walking dogs, not even the soft sounds of a lawnmower or someone chatting on their porch. Just silence and the distant sound of water lapping against the lake shore. He took a deep breath and reminded himself that this was temporary. He would help his mother recover, take care of the house for a while, make sure she was comfortable, and then decide what came next. He wasn't planning on staying long, and he definitely wasn't planning to get involved in the neighborhood's drama. He had barely stepped out with his bags when a woman from across the street appeared, walking briskly toward him. She held a clipboard, which immediately made him nervous. Clipboard people never came with good news. "You're back," she said, her voice carrying a tone of surprise that felt more like disapproval. He nodded politely. "Just here to help my mom for a bit." Her eyes narrowed slightly, like she was trying to decide if she believed him. "Well, make sure you check the updated community rules. A lot has changed since you lived here." He didn't remember her from when he was young, but she carried herself as if she owned the entire block. Maybe she did, at least in spirit. The clipboard told him everything. This had to be someone from the Homeowners Association. "Sure," he said. "I just got in. I'll take a look later." She gave a tight smile. One of those smiles that wasn't a smile at all. "Welcome back," she said, then turned and walked away. He watched her leave, already feeling a knot form in his stomach. He hadn't even unpacked yet, and he could sense trouble coming. Inside the house, things felt more familiar. His mother greeted him with a warm hug, relieved to have someone with her again. After making sure she was settled, he carried his bags to the room he used to sleep in. He expected it to feel smaller after all this time, but it didn't. It felt exactly the same. Later that afternoon, he walked down to the lake. The moment he stepped onto the small wooden pier behind the yard, his eyebrows lifted. The water was darker than he remembered. Not scary dark, but murky in a way that didn't feel right. The lake used to be clear enough that you could see the small fish swimming near the surface. Now, all he saw was cloudy water and a few floating pieces of dead leaves. Maybe he was just imagining things. Maybe it was normal for the season. He crouched down and dipped his hand into the water. It felt fine, but he still didn't like the look of it. As he stood, he heard footsteps behind him. A man from the next yard over nodded in greeting. "Haven't seen you in a long time," the man said. "Been a while," he replied. The neighbor glanced at the lake. "Not the same as when you were a kid, huh?" "Guess not," he said. "Looks different." "Different is one word for it," the neighbor muttered. "But you didn't hear that from me." With that, the man headed back toward his house. He stood there watching the ripples on the water, feeling that same knot tighten again. The lake didn't look sick exactly, but it looked tired, like something had been bothering it for a long time. That evening, when he checked the mailbox, he found a letter already waiting for him. Not from a friend or a service or anyone who should reasonably have known he was back. It was from the HOA. He opened it, expecting something like a welcome note or a harmless reminder. Instead, he found a warning. The letter accused him of unauthorized occupancy and stated that any resident staying more than 3 nights needed to register with the HOA. He stared at the paper, dumbfounded. He had been here for less than 12 hours. He showed the letter to his mother.
"Oh,
"Don't let them bother you," she said. "They've gotten particular about things. They don't like anyone they can't control." Her choice of words made him pause. "Have they been giving you trouble?" She hesitated. "Nothing serious. Just small things. Notes about the lawn, reminders about the trash bin, that kind of stuff. Small things." But the way she said it made him wonder if they were actually small at all. The next morning, he drove to the small community office the HOA used. He figured a face-to-face conversation would clear things up. Maybe the warning was automatic or a mistake. When he walked in, the woman from the clipboard, the same woman from the day before, was sitting at the front desk. She raised her eyebrows, not even pretending to smile this time. "Can I help you?" she asked. He handed her the letter. "I got this yesterday. I think there's been a misunderstanding." "I just arrived." She skimmed the paper. "There's no misunderstanding. All occupants must be documented. It's procedure." "I'm staying with my mother," he said. "It's temporary. Temporary still requires authorization." He tried to stay calm. "Isn't that a bit strict?" "I'm just helping her." Her eyes didn't soften even slightly. "Rules keep the community safe and orderly. If you plan to stay longer than 3 days, you need to complete the occupancy forms." He wanted to argue, but he could tell it wouldn't get him anywhere. So he took the forms she slid across the desk. "Thank you," he said, even though he didn't feel thankful at all. When he returned home, sat at the kitchen table and filled out the paperwork. The questions felt invasive: employment details, expected duration of stay, personal contact information, even an emergency contact not related to his mother. It felt like he was applying to move into a military base rather than visiting his own childhood home. A couple days passed without incident. He spent the mornings helping his mom with small tasks around the house and the afternoons walking by the lake. Each time he visited the water, he felt more certain something was wrong with it. The color, the smell, the way the shoreline looked slightly eroded, all bothered him. One afternoon, he was walking along the edge of the lake when he spotted something he didn't remember being there before. A thin metal pipe poked out from beneath one of the board members' docks. At first, he thought it might be just part of the dock structure. But when he crouched closer, he noticed water flowing out of it, not into the lake. Out of the lake, the pipe was draining water. He stood there, staring at it for a long moment. Why would anyone need a pipe that drained water out of the lake? The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. That night, another letter arrived. This one claimed he had parked his car improperly, even though it was fully inside the driveway. It warned him that repeated violations could result in fines. He felt his frustration growing, but he tried to stay calm. Maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe they were simply strict with everyone. But the next day, a notice appeared on the door. This one accused him of unapproved lawn maintenance methods. He had watered the lawn. That was the violation. When he showed the notice to his mother, she sighed. "They want you gone," she said simply. "Why?" he asked. She gave him a tired smile. "Because you ask questions? Because you pay attention. Because you don't just agree to whatever they say." He felt a strange mix of anger and determination rise in him. He wasn't trying to cause trouble. He wasn't trying to disrupt anything. He just wanted to help his mother and understand why the lake, this beautiful, peaceful place, looked like it was slowly being poisoned. One evening, as he was closing the curtains, he spotted 2 board members walking past the house. They didn't look over at him, but he noticed the way they were talking quietly and glancing toward the lake. Something was going on, and whatever it was, they didn't want him anywhere near it. He didn't know the full story yet, but he knew one thing for sure. The HOA wasn't just being strict. They were being strategic. They wanted him gone, and they weren't going to stop at simple warnings. But he wasn't planning to leave. Not now. Not when something felt this wrong. He looked out the window again, toward the quiet water, and made a silent promise to himself. Whatever the HOA was hiding, he was going to find out. He woke up the next morning feeling more tired than he expected. The past few days had already been heavier than he planned for, and he hadn't even unpacked half of his things yet. His mother slept in, so he made himself some coffee and stepped outside onto the porch. The neighborhood looked peaceful, almost too peaceful. The sun had just started rising, casting a soft light over the roofs and lawns. For a moment, he let himself enjoy the quiet. But it didn't last long. A white SUV slowed down in front of the house. The window rolled down, and a man wearing sunglasses leaned out. "Morning," the man said. "House," his tone polite but distant. "Morning," he replied. "You're the one staying with your mother, right?" He nodded. "Double quotes, just wanted to remind you that the community has designated parking areas for visitors. Driveways are for permanent residents only." He frowned. It's my mother's house. I grew up here. I'm not a visitor. The man shrugged. Just passing along the rules? Before he could respond, the SUV rolled away. He watched it go with a slow exhale. It was obvious now, they weren't just strict. They were targeting him. On purpose. After breakfast, he walked down to the lake again. The water still looked dull and murky. The sun reflected off the surface, but instead of shining, it seemed to scatter in a cloudy pattern. He crouched down by the water's edge and noticed something else. The shoreline looked slightly lower than it did even a few days ago. Not a dramatic drop, but enough that the grass around the edge looked dry and exposed. Behind him, someone cleared their throat. He turned to see the neighbor from the other day. The one who hinted that something was wrong? Mind if I join you? The neighbor asked. He shook his head. Go ahead. The neighbor stood beside him, hands in his pockets. You're already seeing it, huh? Seeing what? The neighbor hesitated, as if weighing whether to say anything. The lake. It's lower. Been dropping for months now? Because of the season? He asked. No. The neighbor's voice was low. Because they're draining it. His chest tightened. Why? That's something you'll have to figure out, the neighbor said quietly. But be careful. The board doesn't like questions, and they definitely don't like anyone getting in their way. He wanted to ask more, but the neighbor walked off before he could. He looked back at the lake. The drain pipe under the dock fresh in his mind. It wasn't just a weird coincidence. It wasn't just stress or his imagination. Something real was going on here. Later that afternoon, he stepped outside to take the trash out and found two people standing near the front of the house. They wore matching shirts with the HOA logo printed on them. Hello, one of them said, forcing a smile. We're conducting a quick check on all properties today. A check for what? He asked. General compliance, the second person answered. We need to take a look at the exterior of the home. Routine inspection. He felt irritation rising. My mother didn't request an inspection. It's not optional, one said. It's part of the community standards, crossed his arms. Then I'll stay with you while you look. They exchanged a glance, clearly not thrilled. But they didn't argue. As they walked around the house, they made notes on their tablets. They pointed out tiny things like a loose gutter clip and a small patch of weeds near the fence. Normal things. Everyday things. Nothing serious, but the way they acted. You'd think the house was falling apart. After they left, he went back inside and sat with his mother. They're checking the house again? She asked gently. He nodded. Is this normal? His mother gave a tired sigh. They inspect whenever they feel like it. They claim it keeps property values high. But sometimes I think they just want control. Control. That was the word he had started to feel in his bones. That evening, he decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. Maybe he could clear his head. Maybe he could understand why the HOA was acting this way. The streets were quiet. Most people were inside, lights glowing behind their windows, as he walked past one of the board members' houses. He heard voices coming from their backyard. He didn't mean to eavesdrop. But the low tone of their conversation drifted toward the street. We need to move faster, a man said. The lake level is getting obvious. Another voice replied, Not my fault people won't mind their own business. The first voice snapped. He froze. They were talking about the lake. Carefully, he stepped back, not wanting them to know he'd heard anything. He kept walking until he reached the end of the street, where the view of the lake opened up again. From there, it was even clearer. The water had receded. Not by a lot, but enough to expose a strip of muddy ground. He stood there for a long time, thinking, why would the HOA want to lower the lake? What could they possibly gain from that? The next morning, he woke to the sound of someone knocking on the door. His mother was resting, so he answered it. It was the clipboard woman again. She didn't wait for him to greet her. We received multiple reports of unauthorized activity near the lake yesterday. Linked. What unauthorized activity? You were seen walking near restricted areas, she said sharply. I walk near the shore, he replied. The same place I've been walking since I was a kid. Those areas are for board-approved access only. He stared at her, confused and frustrated. Since when? She held her clipboard tighter. It's always been that way. He knew that was a lie. He used to spend entire days by the lake without anyone caring. Is there a reason you're trying to keep me away from the water? He asked calmly. The woman stiffened, her eyes hard. We're simply enforcing rules. Then she turned and walked away. He watched her go, anger simmering quietly in his chest. If they were trying to scare him, it wasn't working. It was only making him more determined. That afternoon, he went into his mother's garage and found an old notebook. He started writing down everything that had happened since he returned the warnings. The inspections, the strange comments from neighbors, the pipe draining the lake. He needed to keep track. He needed to stay organized, because whatever the HOA was doing, they clearly didn't want anyone asking questions. And if he wasn't careful, they might try to push him out in ways that went beyond letters and warnings. Over the next few days, more notes from the HOA appeared. One claimed his mother's garden hose was not stored correctly. Another warned that the outdoor light near the porch was too bright. Little things. Petty things. But all of them added up. One evening, as he was writing in his notebook, he heard a soft knock on the back door. When he opened it, the neighbor who had spoken to him about the lake stood there again. Can we talk? The neighbor asked quietly. He nodded and stepped aside. The neighbor walked in, glancing around nervously. I shouldn't be here long, he said. But you need to know something. What is it? They're draining the lake on purpose, the neighbor whispered. Not a rumor, not a guess. I saw the setup with my own eyes. His heart sped up. Why? The neighbor swallowed. Because they want to build something. Something only they'll get to use. And they're trying to lower the water to make it easier. They don't want anyone to find out until it's done. He felt his stomach drop. What are they building? I'm not sure, the neighbor said. But whatever it is, it's not for the community. It's for them, the board. He leaned back, stunned. The silence felt heavy. Why tell me? He asked. Because they're targeting you, the neighbor said. I've lived here long enough to know their patterns. They think you're a threat. They think you're going to expose them. The neighbor pointed toward the lake. And you might be the only one who can stop them before they ruin it completely. He stood there for a long moment, absorbing the weight of those words. That night, he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while his mind raced. This wasn't just about some strict rules or annoying letters. This was something bigger, something deliberate, something that could destroy the lake, the heart of the neighborhood. He thought about the draining pipe, the exposed shoreline, the whispered conversations, the warnings meant to push him away. The HOA wasn't just being difficult. They had a plan, and whether he liked it or not, he was now right in the middle of it. He closed his eyes and told himself one thing. He wasn't going to walk away. Not now. Not when the lake and the truth was on the line. The next few days moved slowly. Almost like the air around the neighborhood had thickened. He felt it every time he stepped outside. People acted polite, but their eyes were cautious whenever they saw him. It was as if the entire community had been told to watch him quietly, like he was some kind of troublemaker. He didn't let it stop him. If anything, the strange tension pushed him more. The notebook he kept in the garage was starting to fill with details, dates, times, conversations, and every odd thing he saw at the lake. He checked the shoreline every morning and every evening, and every time, the water seemed just a little lower. One morning, he woke early and decided to walk down to the lake before the sun fully came up. The air was cool and a thin mist hovered over the surface. For a moment, the quiet felt peaceful. But when he stepped closer to the water, he saw it clearly. The lake level had dropped again. He took a slow breath and shook his head. This wasn't some minor shift. This wasn't normal. As he crouched near the water, he heard the soft hum of something mechanical. It wasn't loud, but it was steady. He followed the sound around the curve of the shore, walking carefully through the grass there. Tucked under a wooden deck behind one of the board members' homes was a small pump system. He could see the pipe running down into the water and another pipe leading out toward a cluster of bushes it was running. It was draining. He crouched behind a tree and watched the steady stream moving through the pipe. It wasn't a lot at once. But running for hours, maybe dice it, would easily lower the lake. A bird startled him when it flew from the branches above, and he stepped back quietly. He knew he needed proof, but he also knew getting caught right now might cause more trouble than he could handle. He made a mental note of the exact spot and turned back toward the house. When he made it home, his mother was already up, heating some tea. "You're out early," she said. "Just walked by the lake," he answered. She paused, giving him a knowing look. "Be careful. I don't want you getting mixed up in something dangerous." "It's already happening," he said softly, "and I can't just ignore it." His mother reached out and squeezed his hand. She didn't say anything more, but the worry in her eyes was enough. Later that day, while he was trimming a few branches in the yard, the same white SUV from the other morning drove past. This time it stopped again. The man with the sunglasses rolled down his window. "You're up early," the man said. He didn't respond right away. "Just taking care of things." The man nodded slowly. "We've been told you're spending a lot of time near the lake. Just be aware that certain parts are off limits." He tapped the pruning shears against his leg. "Why are they off limits?" "Rules," the man replied flatly. "That's all you need to know." Then the SUV rolled away again. He watched it disappear around the corner. It was clear they were trying harder to keep him away from the water, harder to push him out. That afternoon, the sound of raised voices drifted through the air from the neighbor's yard. The neighbor who had warned him earlier was talking with someone from the HOA. The tone was sharp, like a quiet argument meant to sound polite. He didn't go over or try to listen in. But later, when the neighbor passed by, the man looked uneasy. "Everything okay?" he asked. The neighbor shook his head. "They're watching everyone. They know someone's been talking." "Talking about what?" he asked, though he already knew. "The lake," the neighbor whispered. "They're nervous. They're checking on people, asking questions. They're worried someone will report what they're doing." The neighbor glanced around and then leaned closer. "Don't trust anyone from the board. Not one of them. They all know what's happening," he nodded, feeling the weight settle deeper. A few hours later, the sky darkened suddenly. Thick clouds rolled in, and within minutes, heavy rain started to fall. He helped his mother close the windows and then stood by the back door, watching the downpour hit the lake. But even with the rain, he noticed something strange. The water wasn't rising. A storm like this should have lifted the waterline, even if only slightly. But the lake stayed low, almost stubbornly so. Rain splashed across the surface, but the water remained lower than normal. The shoreline still pulled back. It wasn't natural. It wasn't right. By the next morning, the rain had stopped. He walked down to the lake to check the shoreline again. That's when he noticed something that made his stomach tighten. Dead fish. Not many. Just a few, floating near the edge. But the sight hit him like a warning. The water wasn't just lit, it was sick. He took a moment to steady himself. Then he carefully took out his phone and snapped a few pictures. He didn't know if they would help later, but it felt important to document everything. As he headed back to the house, he saw the clipboard woman walking briskly down the path with two other board members. They stopped when they noticed him. "Good morning," she said sharply. He nodded. "Morning." One of the men glanced toward the lake. "We noticed you were taking photos," as he said calmly. "Something's wrong with the water." The clipboard woman tightened her jaw. "If you're concerned about anything, you can report it to the HOA directly. Taking photos near restricted areas violates policy." Raise an eyebrow. "Since when is taking pictures a violation?" "It's always been," she replied, though her tone wasn't convincing. He didn't move. "I'm just worried about the lake. It's not your responsibility," she snapped. The three of them exchanged a look and then walked away quickly, whispering to one another. He watched them go, his frustration bubbling. When he returned home, he found another notice taped to the door. This one accused him of damaging community harmony through disruptive behavior. He almost laughed. But the frustration weighed too heavy. Later that day, he walked into town and bought a small test kit from a store that sold fishing and outdoor supplies. It wasn't professional level, but it was enough to see if the water quality had changed noticeably. That evening, he sat near the shore with a test kit, checking chlorine levels, oxygen, and basic readings. Nothing was dramatically off, but the oxygen level seemed lower than it should be. As he worked, he heard footsteps behind him. "You're not giving up, are you?" a familiar voice said. He looked up to see the neighbor again. "Not yet," he replied. The neighbor crouched beside him. "They won't stop. They're getting desperate," he nodded, "because they know they're doing something wrong." The neighbor exhaled slowly. "You didn't hear this from me? ... But I heard the board talking about some construction plans. Something about a private launch. Something only for them." "Using the lake?" he asked. The neighbor nodded. "But they can't build unless the water's low enough. They're trying to lower it fast so they can start." He stared out across the lake. The water looked calm, almost peaceful. But beneath that calm, he knew something harmful was happening. "If they keep draining it," the neighbor continued, "the whole ecosystem will collapse and nobody else knows?" He asked. "They kept it secret. They told the community they're doing routine maintenance. But they don't care about the water. They care about their project." He closed the test kit slowly. "We need proof," the neighbor nodded. "Then you need to see what's behind the maintenance shed by the far end of the lake." He looked at him. "What's there?" "Pipes, pumps, records. You'll understand when you see it." Before he could ask more, the neighbor stood. "Just be careful. They're watching everything." That night, he barely slept. The thought of the shed kept circling in his mind. What if that was the key? What if that was everything he needed to expose what the HOA was doing? But he knew he couldn't go during the day. Too many eyes, too much risk. So he waited until late in the evening when most of the neighborhood lights went out. The air was cool and cicadas buzzed softly in the distance. He slipped out through the back door, walked along the dark edge of the yard, and made his way toward the far side of the lake. The moonlight was dim, but it was enough to guide him. He kept to the shadows, moving slowly and carefully. When he reached the shed, he stopped and listened. No voices. No footsteps. Only the faint sound of the pump humming nearby. He moved beside the shed and shined a small flashlight toward the ground. That's when he saw them thick pipes running out from under the structure and into the lake. His heart pounded. He walked around the shed quietly and found a stack of boxes behind it. Inside the top box were papers, blueprints, permits, and notes. The notes made his stomach twist. They weren't for maintenance. They were for construction. Private dock. A private launch. A private area reserved. Only for board members, and in bold letters. One line stood out. Lake levels must remain low throughout the building process. He stared at the words, anger rising, his hands tightening around the papers. This was it. This was the evidence. He tucked a few pages into his jacket, careful not to make noise. Then he quietly put everything back where it had been and moved away from the shed. When he reached his yard again, he exhaled for the first time in minutes. He had proof. Real proof. But he also knew something else now. Something that made his pulse race. If the board was willing to drain the lake in secret, ignore environmental harm, lie to the community, and pressure anyone who questioned them, what would they do when they learned he had found their plans? He looked back at the still water, lit faintly by the moon. The lake was suffering, and now that he knew the truth, things were only going to get more dangerous. But he wasn't backing down, not now, not when the lake's future and the truth depended on him staying in the fight. Morning after he found the papers behind the shed, he woke up feeling restless. His sleep had been broken and uneasy, filled with thoughts of the lake and the secret project the board was trying to force into reality. His mother noticed the tired look on his face during breakfast. "You didn't rest well," she said gently. He shook his head. "Just thinking a lot." She reached across the table and touched his hand. "Please be careful. You're one person. They're a group. They won't like that you're looking into things." "I know," he said softly, "but I can't ignore what they're doing." After helping his mother settle into her favorite chair, he stepped outside. The air felt heavy with humidity, and the lake looked even lower than before. The muddy shoreline stretched out like a wound around the water. A couple of birds pecked around the exposed earth, their movements slow and uncertain. As he walked down the path, he noticed something unusual. A thin trail of tire marks led from the maintenance shed toward the back of the neighborhood. They weren't from a regular car. The lines were too narrow, more like a small utility cart. He followed the tracks with cautious steps, keeping behind bushes and fences whenever he heard movement. The trail took him behind several houses and then toward a small clearing near the lake's far corner. There, he saw two board members standing next to a large metal box that hummed like machinery. They were talking quietly, their expressions tense. "Did you check the levels?" one asked, still dropping. "Should be where we need it by the end of the week." "What about him?" the other said, his voice sharp. "He's been hanging around too much. We're handling it," the first replied. "He'll slip up eventually. We'll write him up and force him out." His heart pounded in his chest. They weren't being subtle anymore. They weren't even trying. He stepped back slowly, careful not to snap a twig or rustle a leaf. Once he got far enough away, he breathed out quietly. The board wasn't going to stop. Not by themselves. He needed help. But from who? He spent the next couple of hours thinking. Calling the county felt like the right move, but he knew he needed solid evidence. Something undeniable. Something they couldn't push aside. He went back to the shed area late in the afternoon, hoping to check the pipes again and maybe gather clearer photos. But as he approached, he froze. The shed door was open, and inside, two men were moving equipment around. They were pulling out boxes, as if clearing the space. When one of them stepped aside, he saw something that made his chest tighten. They were removing papers that looked exactly like the ones he had tucked inside his jacket the previous night. They were trying to hide the evidence. He needed to act. Before everything disappeared, he backed up silently and went home. He took the papers he had hidden in a drawer and placed them neatly inside a folder. He also printed out the photos he had taken, the draining pipe, the exposed shoreline, the dead fish. Everything felt fragile, as if one wrong step could ruin his chance to stop what the board was doing. That evening, the neighbor who had been helping him showed up again. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to follow him. "They know you're getting close," the neighbor whispered. "I know," he said. "They're cleaning the shed right now." The neighbor nodded. "They probably think someone tipped you off. They'll try to erase everything." "I have some of the papers," he said quietly. The neighbor's eyes widened. "Be careful with those. If they find out, they'll make things harder for you," he sighed. "I don't think they can make things much harder." "Believe me," the neighbor said, lowering his voice further. "They can." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the distant hum of insects. "What's the plan?" the neighbor finally asked. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'm calling the county. I have photos, papers, and tests from the water. It's enough to make them look into it." The neighbor nodded slowly. "Just be cautious. And keep copies. Make backups." After the neighbor left, he spent the next hour scanning the documents into his laptop. He saved them in multiple places on his computer, on a flash drive, and even emailed them to himself. When he finally finished, he felt a small sense of relief. But that relief didn't last long. Late that night, while he was brushing his teeth, he heard a sound outside, something knocking lightly against the siding of the house. He froze and listened. A moment later, he heard it again. He walked to the living room and peeked through the curtains. A shadow moved by the edge of the yard, near the side gate. It was faint, but he saw it. Clearly a person stepping back into the darkness. Someone had been near the house. He locked the door and checked the windows twice. His mother was already asleep, so he kept quiet, not wanting to scare her. But his mind raced. Were they watching him? Had they seen him copying documents? Had they followed the neighbor? He barely slept. When morning came, he woke early and called the county office. He explained the situation calmly, sticking to the facts. The person on the phone seemed concerned, especially when he mentioned the draining pumps. "We'll send an inspector within the next couple of days," the county employee said. He thanked them and hung up. Feeling a mixture of hope and anxiety, he stepped outside to clear his head, but as soon as he reached the driveway, he saw a new notice taped to the front door. This one accused him of harassing board members. He let out a humorless laugh. They must have sensed something. Maybe they knew he had made the call later that afternoon. While he was in the backyard pulling weeds with his mother, the clipboard woman appeared again. She walked into the yard without being invited. "We need to discuss your recent behavior," she said sharply. He stood slowly. "What behavior?" "You've been seen trespassing near restricted areas," she said. "We've also received complaints that you've been spreading false claims about the lake." He stared at her. "False claims?" "Yes," she said firmly. "And we won't tolerate attempts to cause chaos in the community." His mother watched from her chair, worry on her face. He kept his tone calm. "I haven't said anything to anyone. I'm just noticing things happening with the water. It's not your concern," she snapped. "And if you keep causing trouble, we'll be forced to take further action." He didn't respond. There was nothing he could say that she would listen to. She turned sharply and walked away. Leaving the gate open behind her, his mother sighed. "They're angry. They're worried." "That's because they know they're wrong," he said. 2 days later, the county inspector arrived. A man in a clean shirt and boots stepped out of a truck with a clipboard. He introduced himself politely and explained that he was here to look into the water complaints. The HOA board members were already outside, standing near the road like a small army. The clipboard woman smiled stiffly as she approached the inspector. "Thank you for coming," she said sweetly. "We've been concerned about some residents spreading misinformation." The inspector nodded, politely, but didn't seem persuaded. "I'd like to see the lake," he said. They all walked toward the water together. The inspector examined the shoreline, the muddy exposed areas, and the cloudy water. He crouched down, dipped a small tube into the lake, and took a sample. The board members hovered behind him like anxious birds. "Everything appears normal," the clipboard woman insisted. The inspector ignored her and walked along the shore. Then he saw at the pump pipe under the dock. "What's this?" he asked. The board members froze. The clipboard woman stepped forward. "Routine drainage. Completely standard." The inspector looked at her. "Routine for what?" She didn't answer. The inspector made a few notes, then circled around the lake. When he reached the far corner, he spotted the pipes behind the shed. His expression changed. He turned to the board. "I'm going to need to look inside that shed." The board members exchanged panicked glances. "That area is restricted," one said quickly. The inspector raised an eyebrow. "Not for me." He opened the shed door and stepped inside. The space was mostly empty now, but traces of equipment were still visible, marks on the floor, damp spots near where the pipes ran, and a faint smell of machinery. The inspector stepped back outside. "I'll need more information," he said, "and I'll be filing a report." The clipboard woman tried to smile. "I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding." The inspector didn't smile back. He thanked them and headed toward his truck. The board member stood frozen for a moment, then slowly walked away in silence. He watched them go, feeling a small spark of hope. But that hope dimmed when he noticed the clipboard woman glance back at him with a cold, sharp glare. She knew. She knew he had started all of this, and she wasn't going to forget it. Later that night, as the sky darkened, the wind picked up. The lake rippled under the sudden breeze, and clouds gathered quickly. A storm rolled in faster than expected. Lightning cracked across the sky, followed by loud thunder. Rain poured down in heavy sheets. He stood at the back window, watching the water. The lake churned with the force of the rain. But something felt off. The shoreline wasn't rising. The pumps were still running, even in the storm. They were draining the water. He grabbed his jacket and rushed outside, ignoring the rain hitting his face. He ran toward the shed, mud splashing under his shoes. When he reached it, he saw the small pump house shaking slightly from the storm winds. The pipes rattled. Water gushed through them with force. The storm made everything louder whined. Thunder, the rumbling of the pump system, and then, without warning, part of the shoreline collapsed. A section of mud slid into the water with a heavy splash. He stumbled back, breathing hard. The lake was being damaged beyond anything he expected. He watched as the water churned violently, exposing tree roots. Pulling debris down the slope, the storm had pushed the lake to its limit, and the draining pumps were finishing the job. When he finally returned home, soaked to the skin, he knew something for certain. This wasn't just about rules. This wasn't just about the morning after the board's meeting felt different. The air was cool, the kind that usually came right before a rain, and the neighborhood was unusually quiet. He stepped outside with a cup of tea, hoping to calm his nerves. Today wasn't going to be easy. He knew that much. The lake was still, almost too still, like it was holding its breath along with him. Even from the porch, he could see the damage from the draining muddy banks. Scattered patches of cracked dirt and a larger gap between the water line and the shore than ever before. But for the first time since all this started, he felt something close to hope. The truth was finally coming out. After everything he had found, after all the pushing and warnings and petty notes, people finally saw what the board had been hiding. And now the board had to answer for it. He walked back inside and sat with his mother at the kitchen table. She reached for his hand. "You didn't sleep much," she said. "Not really," he answered with a tired smile. "You've done more than anyone expected," she said softly. "No matter how today goes, I'm proud of you." Her words helped more than she knew. By late morning, cars began pulling into the community center's parking lot. Neighbors stepped out quietly, some whispering to each other, others looking toward the lake with worried faces. He and his mother arrived together, joining the slow crowd forming near the entrance. For the first time, no board member stood at the door greeting people. No polite smiles. No forced warmth. Inside, the room filled fast. Chairs scraped against the floor as people took their seats. A quiet murmur spread through the crowd, certainty mixed with anger. He sat near the middle, notebook in hand, while his mother settled beside him. The neighbor who had warned him nodded from across the room. Finally, the door in the front opened and the board members walked out. They looked tense, nervous. The usual confidence was gone. The crowd fell silent. One board member stepped forward. "Thank you all for attending on short notice," he began. The room stayed still. "We've received complaints about the lake," the board member continued, "and we want to address the situation responsibly," a voice from the back called out. "You should have addressed it months ago." Another shouted, "You hid it from us." The board member raised his hands for calm, but the crowd wasn't ready to settle. Not yet. He finally stepped forward. "I'd like to ask a question," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. The board hesitated. "What was the purpose of draining the lake?" he asked. Whispers rippled across the room. One board member cleared her throat. "Lowering the lake level was part of a maintenance plan." He shook his head. "That's not true. A maintenance plan would have been announced. Notices would have been sent. You would have asked for community approval." The room murmured again, this time louder. The board member tried to respond. "But you didn't let them dodge it. You had pumps installed. You rerouted water. You restricted areas that used to be open. You kept telling people to stay away, especially me." The tension in the room tightened. "You weren't protecting the lake," he said. "You were hiding what you were doing." One neighbor stood up. "What were they doing?" He swallowed, then took a breath. "They were preparing to build a private dock, not for the community, for themselves." Gasps filled the room. Another neighbor spoke up. "Is that true?" The board didn't answer. Someone else demanded, "Did you use our dues for it?" The silence from the board was louder than anything. Then the neighbor who had warned him stepped forward. "I saw the construction plans," he said. "They're real. And they were never meant to be shared with the rest of us." The room erupted. People stood from their seats, shouting questions, pointing fingers, demanding explanations. The board tried to calm them, but it was too late. The truth was out. After a few chaotic minutes, someone suggested forming an independent committee to investigate. People agreed immediately. Others called for the board to step down. The tension had turned into determination. He watched it all quietly. He didn't need to shout. His job was already done. When things finally settled, the board members announced they would pause all activity near the lake and turn over documents to the new committee. They didn't have a choice anymore. The meeting ended with no applause, only a heavy sense of change. Outside neighbors gathered in small groups, talking faster than usual, trying to make sense of everything. Some came up to him, people he barely knew, thanking him for standing up, for pushing when everyone else stayed quiet. He nodded politely, overwhelmed by the attention. He never wanted credit. He only wanted the truth. His mother wrapped her arm around his. "Let's go home," she said. As they walked back, the sun finally broke through the clouds, casting light across the lake. Even with the damage, it looked a little brighter. Later that afternoon, the new committee announced a restoration plan. They would bring in experts to repair the shoreline, refill the lake naturally, and make sure nothing like this happened again. The neighborhood had learned a hard lesson, but at least they were finally working together. That evening, he returned to the water one last time. He stood at the edge, watching the slow ripples move across the surface. It wasn't perfect, but it was healing. He heard footsteps behind him. It was the neighbor who had helped him. "You did good," the neighbor said. "So did you." The neighbor nodded, then added, the board stepping down. He raised his eyebrows. "All of them?" "Every last one," the neighbor replied. "Word is, they're leaving the neighborhood altogether." He felt a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. "Guess they won't be bothering anyone anymore." "No," the neighbor said, "and the lake will finally be in good hands." They stood together in silence for a moment. Watching the water, he thought back to the first day he arrived, how the lake had seemed off, how the board members watched him, how the warnings had started piling up. They had tried to keep him away. They had tried to intimidate him. They had underestimated him. He smiled faintly. "You heading out soon?" the neighbor asked. "I'll stay a little while longer with my mother," he said. "Make sure things settle down." "That's good," the neighbor said. "People feel safer with you around." He laughed quietly. "I'm not a guard dog." "Maybe not," the neighbor replied, "but you don't let things slide. That's rare." When the neighbor left, he walked along the edge of the lake, stopping near the old dock. The wood creaked under his feet just like it did when he was a kid. He looked out across the water, imagining what it would look like once restored. For the first time in a long time, he felt peaceful. The lake wasn't destroyed after all. It was coming back, and the people who tried to ruin it were finally paying the price, not through revenge, not through shouting, but through truth. As the sky began to darken, he whispered to himself, "It's going to be okay." And for the first time since he arrived, he truly believed it. He turned and headed home, the soft calm of the lake gently following behind him like a quiet promise of better days ahead.